Today we'll be covering Unit 6, Industrialization and Economic Development.
Spatial interaction has increased in speed and distance, leaning towards a trend of space-time compression. Globalization describes an increasing sense of interconnectedness and spatial interaction among governments, cultures, and economies. Globalization of Western culture is represented in some countries that wish to maintain purity of their cultures without the cultural imperialism of Western forces. Examples of this include McDonaldization and Disneyfication. Countries that establish an industrialized economy based on manufacturing and global trade are called newly industrialized countries. 4 East Asian countries experienced rapid economic growth by following the technology boom in the late 20th century and became NICs. These include Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and are referred to as the 4 Asian Tigers. These regions followed the growth patterns of post-World War II Japan by developing a global reach for high-tech products. Together with China and Japan, the 4 Asian Tigers make up the core of the Asian economic engine known as the Pacific Rim Economic Region. Mexico established maquiladora zones, which are special economic zones on its northern border with the United States. Multinational corporations can outsource labor to these maquiladoras, taking advantage of labor costs in Mexico that are far below those required in the United States. Workers to manufacture the same product. Also, the Mexico government gave tax breaks to U.S. multinational corporations that are in these zones, and products can be shipped to U.S. markets tariff-free. This program was originally created for Mexican farmers that could no longer make a living from the land. Nearly 500,000 people work in maquiladoras today. Unfortunately, these areas are overpopulated and cursed with pollution problems. As part of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the maquiladora system is supposed to be phased out in the coming years. In order to assist economic development and human rights globally, nonprofit organizations like Doctors Without Borders and Save the Children enter the scene. Thousands of NGOs represent many different causes, including women's rights, healthcare, poverty, and hunger. NGOs often supply resources and money to local businesses and causes advancing human and economic development. NGOs have proven to make a difference in helping combat world problems such as HIV, AIDS, and hunger.
The next thing we're going to be looking at is reducing the development gap, and the first part of that is the self-sufficiency approach. In this approach, the country needs to be able to provide for its own people and needs to be independent from other foreign economies. Rural areas must develop along with urban areas, and poverty must be reduced across the entire country. China, India, Eastern Europe, and Africa are all real-world examples of the self-sufficiency approach. Some drawbacks on the self-sufficiency approach are corruption and inefficiency, limited development. The self-sufficiency model favors a closed economic state in which imports are limited and heavily taxed so that local businesses can flourish without having to compete with foreign companies.
Structuralist theories argue that LDCs are locked into a cycle of entrenched underdevelopment by the global economic system that supports an unequal structure, meaning that the LDCs are stuck being less developed and treated unequally. The next topic is the dependency theory. This theory was created by Emanuel Wallerstein, and it argues that political and economic relations among countries limit the ability of LDCs to modernize and develop. One country's actions directly impact the development paths of other countries. Therefore, countries are not independent, but dependent. Emanuel Wallerstein's world system analysis separates countries into 3 categories: the core, periphery, and semi-periphery. Core countries gain their power through the exploitation of the peripheral and semi-peripheral countries. The core countries are the powerhouse of the world global economy. Examples of core countries include Japan, USA, oh, that's a bad A, and Germany. Periphery countries include the Dominican Republic, and Ghana, and other LDCs. Examples of semi-peripheral countries include the newly industrialized countries such as Mexico and India. To lessen the gap between MDCs and LDCs, LDCs must develop their economies more rapidly. The self-sufficiency approach is when a country is able to provide for its own people and is independent from foreign economies. To develop evenly, a country should spread its investments equally across all sectors. Rural areas must develop along with urban areas, and poverty needs to be reduced across the entire country. The self-sufficiency approach favors closed economic state where imports are limited and heavily taxed. China, Eastern Europe, and Africa are all real-world examples of where the self-sufficiency approach worked. Some problems with the self-sufficiency approach is corruption. That's a weird C. And inefficiency and limited development. Another approach to reducing the development gap is international trade. International trade approach pushes a country to identify its unique set of strengths and channel investment towards building and improving those strengths. Some countries have a comparative advantage, and that is when a country is better at producing a certain good or offering some service than other countries. An example is Japan. Japan is better at producing high technologies, so they've put all their investments into that. All right, now we will discuss happily multinational corporations, hence the Walmart picture. Multinational corporations, or MNCs, are the primary agents of globalization. They're businesses with headquarters in one country and production facilities in another country. They usually conglomerate corporations, which means that one massive corporation owns and operates a collection of smaller companies that provides it with specific services and production process. MNC's headquarters are usually located in core countries like like America and Germany and the more developed countries, while their production facilities are located in peripheral countries. The practice of an MNC to relocate a piece of its manufacturing operations to factories in other countries is called outsourcing. MNCs outsource for low labor costs, lower tax rate, and cheaper land prices. So low labor, low tax rates, and cheaper land prices. So next we're going to talk about foreign direct investment, which is when many less developed countries actively solicit foreign corporations' investment in their countries. Countries often want to attract MNCs, so they establish special economic zones, which are regions offering special tax breaks, eased environmental restrictions, and offer incentives to attract foreign business and investments. An example of a country with a special economic zone is China. Export processing zones are regions that offer tax breaks and loosen labor restrictions in LDCs to attract export-driven production processes, such as factories producing goods for foreign markets, and free trade zones, which are the same thing as export processing zones. Geographers often wonder if the increased rate of production and development can be maintained. Fossil fuels and natural resources are being depleted. Land area is becoming vacationable and being transformed to meet tourist needs and wants. Ecotourism compromises tourist operations that aim to do as little harm to the environment as possible. Costa Rica is an example of a country trying to use ecotourism by making smaller, less harmful tourist attractions, such as zip lining instead of a whole amusement park. To keep from running out of fossil fuels and natural resources, humans must embrace the idea of sustainable development. Sustainable development is a rate of growth and resource consumption that can be maintained from one generation to another. The next topic is the greenhouse effect, which is when industrial outputs such as CO2, methane, chlorofluorocarbons, and water vapors combine in the atmosphere, creating a sponge-like vapor that transforms radiation into heat, causing the Earth's temperature to rise. The last theory is the global warming theory. This theory argues that the Earth's temperature rises is causing negative consequences such as premature melting of polar ice caps. Industrialization and its diffusion throughout the world are directly linked to these global changes, for industrialization has caused human resource consumption and pollution emissions to increase. Structural adjustments are stipulations that require the country receiving the loan to make economic changes in order to use the loan. Privatization is the selling of publicly operated industries to market-driven corporations. Privatization is one proposed solution to increase economic efficiency in LDCs. Privatization can cause social hardship for many families that once depend on government-owned and operated resources being sold off to profit-driven corporations. The movement of foreign companies to local economies threatens the survival of local businesses driven out of the market by larger MNCs. Liberal development theories contrast with and claim that development is a process which all countries can move through. Rostow's model of development is also known as the ladder of development because it resembles a path that ultimately leads towards modernization. Developed in the 1950s, Rostow's modernization model predicts that countries move through stages of structural change. Rostow's model consists of 5 stages altogether. More developed countries are located in stages 4 through 5, whereas less developed countries are located in stages 1 to 3. Stage 1, which is the traditional society, focuses on subsistence farming within families. Technology is very limited, and national wealth is allocated to tasks that are not economically productive. Stage 2, the preconditions to take off, is when a region first begins to develop. A small group of people initiate innovative economic activities. The few begin to invest in infrastructure, which set the stage for economic development. Trading surpluses and production increases as well. Stage 3, which is the takeoff stage, the elite class show rapid economic growth. Workers shift from agricultural to manufacturing jobs, and industrialization increases. Stage 4, the drive to maturity, diffusion of advanced technology increases. Workers become skilled and specialized, and the economy begins to grow and diversify in many directions. So this is, by skilled and specialized, it means like certain like doctors and clinics, and not just like an overall doctor, but like a foot doctor or something. And then, yay, stage 5. Stage 5 is the high mass consumption stage, which the economy shifts from dominance of manufacturing to dominance of the service sector, tertiary, and quaternary jobs. High incomes characterize much of the workforce, and masses of people become consumers of productive goods. As any theory would, Razos' model consists of a few criticisms. The model is based on a Western European and Anglo-American development pattern and does not account for roadblocks of development such as post-colonial dependency on former colonizers that many countries experience while developing economies. Another criticism is that each country is considered as an individual agent rather than an interlocking system.